Well, we're officially 1 year into Donald Trump's second term, and I've got to be honest, I don't think it's going too well, to put it mildly. Just on the domestic front, more than 50% of the objectives laid out in Project 2025 have already been implemented. A secret police force is now going door to door to hunt down immigrants. They're also kidnapping people off of the streets and putting them in concentration camps where human rights abuses and deaths are common occurrences, mostly due to neglect, but sometimes because of straight-up homicide, as was the case with Geraldo Lunas Campo, who was strangled to death in a concentration camp in Texas. They're also executing citizens in broad daylight with impunity and then treating the victim's family like they're the criminals. And that same Gestapo-like secret police force is also functioning as a de facto personal paramilitary for the president, occupying cities run by his political opponents and terrorizing residents at his behest. And our descent into full-blown authoritarianism has happened so quickly that international human rights groups like Amnesty are sounding the alarm about the rapid erosion of human rights in the U.S., including freedom of speech, free press, freedom from political persecution, freedom from political intimidation, Fourth Amendment protection, such as due process, just to name a few. In fact, just 6 months in, political philosophers like John Werner Muller were already sounding the alarm about the total collapse of checks and balances, not to mention academics with expertise on fascism fled the country just months into Trump's second term. And mind you, millions of Americans knew that it would be bad to vote for a fascist, but they voted affirmatively for fascism anyway because so many of them thought that the upside would be that the cost of eggs would be cheaper. So let that sink in. But we're barely even scratching the surface on the domestic front because I haven't even talked about the blatant corruption from this regime, or Doge, remember that? Or the Epstein files. The American way of life has fundamentally changed within the span of a year. And it's not like things were great before, but I would give anything to go back to the time when things were only very bad. That sounds like utopian almost by comparison. But on the international front, it's arguably even worse because Trump has irreparably destroyed relationships that we've had with other countries for centuries. And the entire world sentiment towards the US can be summed up by this Danish member of parliament.
Let me put this in words you might understand. Mr. President, fuck off.
He's basically speaking for the rest of the world. And can you blame anybody for feeling this way? The Prime Minister of Greenland is now telling residents to prepare for a possible invasion by their supposed ally, the United States. And Denmark has even deployed troops to Greenland as tensions escalate. And expectedly, the threat of a U.S. invasion has led to protests in Greenland, with both Danes and Greenlanders wearing red MAGA hats which state, "Make America go away." Who can blame them? And Greenlanders in particular are now faced with a choice. Do they flee the country if the U.S. invades, or do they stay and fight? And this woman is making preparations to flee the country and explaining to her parents that she's not going to be able to take them with her, while others are committed to staying and fighting a potential U.S. invasion. But they're not alone because Trump is simultaneously threatening to invade Mexico, and the country's population is reasonably on edge as well as a result, with their president having to reassure citizens that the U.S. military activity in their vicinity isn't a sign of an imminent invasion because, they think that it might be, given what Trump has said. And even Canada is preparing for a potential U.S. invasion, something that they say is unlikely, but they still think that that's warranted given Trump's numerous threats to annex them as well. And I can't stress this enough, our reputation will never, ever recover from this. And it's not really clear yet if we're going to have free and fair elections going forward, but assuming that we do, assuming one day we get a normal president who tries to restore American democracy and rebuild the liberal international order that Trump trampled on, countries are still never going to want to trust us ever again. Can you blame them? They're right to never trust us again. Who wants to sign a treaty with us when a future fascist president can just renege on it immediately? Who wants to make a deal with the country when the same leader you just made a deal with reneges on said deal? Like, Trump just struck a deal with European countries last year, and he's now announcing new tariffs on them as a punishment because they don't want him to invade Greenland. And then there's also the letter. We haven't even talked about the fucking letter yet, where he sent a letter to the leader of Norway admitting that he is wanting to invade Greenland because he's salty about not winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Even though the Norwegian government doesn't control who wins the prize, that's an independent body, and they also aren't even in control of Greenland, that's Denmark, so why he sent them this letter, I don't know, but we will never live down the humiliation that is Donald Trump, and we don't deserve to. The way that the world has to kiss his ass and coddle him like a child and stroke his ego and give him fake trophies and whatnot. Like, it is truly one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen in my entire fucking life. And whether we like it or not, that is going to be how the world views Americans in perpetuity. And to be honest, it's not that far off, right? Us sane Americans, though, we're going to have to pretend to be Canadians for the rest of our lives if we ever travel abroad, because, like, I have too much pride to ever be associated with whatever the fuck that is. And on the subject of Donald Trump making a fool of himself and threatening allies, he just threatened a 200% tariff on France because Macron doesn't want to join his dumbass board of peace or whatever the fuck he's proposing now.
Oh, did he say that? Well, nobody wants him because he's going to be out of office very soon. So, you know, that's all right. What I'll do is, if they feel like Costo, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join. But he doesn't have to join. If he said that, you're probably giving it to me a little bit differently.
So let me get this straight. Trump is saying, I don't want him to join, but if he doesn't join, I'm going to punish him for not joining, but he doesn't have to join if he doesn't want to join, although he probably didn't even say that he doesn't want to join. What the fuck, man? Like, he is actually insane. And if the cabinet doesn't invoke the 25th Amendment, you might as well get rid of it, because if it's not used now, it's clearly never, ever going to be used. I will never get over the fact that this fucking guy is America's first dictator. Like, I always imagine it'd be somebody who's extremely suave and intelligent and charismatic and not overtly Machiavellian, but instead, it's this bloated, moist pedophile with the IQ of a doorknob who wears orange clown makeup that he couldn't apply evenly if his life depended on it. Like, how is this real life? How is this actually the reality that we are fucking living in? But I do want to be clear, because there are actual consequences for what Trump is doing internationally, and it would be bad enough if it was just our reputation and credibility on the line, but if he keeps antagonizing our allies, they could utterly ruin us in a plethora of ways. Our economy could collapse if the world chooses to abandon the dollar as the reserve currency. Europe is already threatening to use an anti-coercion instrument known as the trade bazooka, where they collectively impose crippling tariffs on the US to crush our industries. A top French economist is calling for retaliatory action against American oligarchs like Elon Musk in order to punish Donald Trump. And if Denmark in particular really wanted to make us suffer, they could cut off our access to their pharmaceuticals, including Ozempic and even insulin. And since America gets around 74% of its total insulin supply from Denmark, that could lead to an actual shortage of a drug that people need to survive. And this is something that they're weighing as a countermeasure to Trump's imperialist aggression. And Trump seems to still think that other countries need us more than we need them, even after China just clapped his cheeks in the trade war. China stopped buying U.S. soybeans from farmers in America, and they're instead now buying them from Argentina. And now American farmers, most of which voted for Donald Trump, by the way, are at risk of losing their farms because of the policies of the dipshit that they voted for. But destroying entire industries wasn't even a wake-up call for Donald Trump, apparently, because he is still antagonizing the rest of the world as if there's no consequences. And the rest of the world have mostly kept their powder dry up until this point. But based on some of the comments made by world leaders at Davos, you really do start to get the sense that tensions have reached a boiling point. Like, just listen to some highlights from Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech, and you understand that they are not playing games anymore with us.
It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Well, it won't. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination. If great powers abandon even the pretense of rules and values for the unhindered pursuit of their power and interests, the gains from transactionalism will become harder to replicate. hegemons cannot continually monetize their relationships. Allies will diversify to hedge against uncertainty. They'll buy insurance, increase options, in order to rebuild sovereignty. Sovereignty that was once grounded in rules but will increasingly be anchored in the ability to withstand pressure.
To translate, he's saying we are disentangling the Canadian economy from the US economy so that way they can't use their financial might as a weapon of leverage against us to get us to do what they want. And they're not alone. More and more countries are moving away from their dependence on the US economy in favor of more bilateral agreements with stable countries who have reliable leaders. Canada also just struck a deal with China last week. In other words, they're trying to cut the US out of the equation because we just can't be trusted. And if enough countries do this, they can basically bring the entire US empire to heel. That would be really bad for us economically speaking, but I mean, again, can you blame them? I don't wish pain and suffering on Americans, especially the ones who didn't have anything to do with this mess, but I understand why other countries feel like they have to use extreme measures to stop us, do things that would humble us, because look at what's happening. They can't just shut up and take it. Like, they have to stand up to this bully that is Donald Trump. And Carney was not the only one taking shots at the US at Davos, because the French Prime Minister made similar comments.
Competition from the United States of America through trade agreements that undermine our export interests, demand maximum concessions, and openly aim to weaken and subordinate Europe, combined with an endless accumulation of new tariffs that are fundamentally unacceptable, even more so when they are used as leverage against territorial sovereignty. But we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
So the rest of the world is fucking done with the United States. They are done. Centuries of diplomacy, decades of international organization and order all gone like that because millions of brain-dead dipshit Americans decided to put this madman in charge of the most powerful country in the world. All because they thought that he would bring down the cost of eggs for some reason. So, needless to say, the first year of Trump's second term hasn't been very good. In fact, it's been inconceivably catastrophic, like worse than the worst case scenario that I envisioned in my head. I knew it would be bad, but I just wasn't creative enough to envision all of the ways that they would fuck the country and the world over. Like, they're finding new ways to fuck up the country every day. It's so bad that even centrist pundits like Anna Kasparian, who dismissed Trump's association with Project 2025 and even denied that he was a fascist, are now admitting actually they were very much wrong.
I'm sorry. I feel guilt every single day that I didn't see this coming. I'm such an idiot.
Yeah. And that clip really speaks to how bad things are, because for somebody like Anna, it would behoove her to continue to downplay Trump's threat in order to appease her new right-wing viewers and friends. But in doing so, she'd basically be denying reality and would thus lose even more credibility than she already has. So, she's forced to basically admit that yeah, it is really bad. It's undeniably bad. Even Piers Morgan, another centrist, talks about how hard it is to keep up with Donald Trump because every day there's some new bullshit to dread. Like, that's not the way that he worded it, but that's the vibe that I got from what he said, because you can't keep up. At this point, the only people who can't see how bad it is are Trump's actual cult members who are delusionally living in an alternate reality. But the realm of empirical reality, the plane of existence that most of us actually live in, it's pretty obvious for us. It is an objective fact that Trump is going to be regarded as one of the most destructive forces in the history of this country. And this is the obvious conclusion after just one fucking year, might I add. We've got 3 more to go, at a minimum, because that's assuming he leaves office. So who knows what else he has in store for us, but one thing's for sure, the longer he stays in office, the more damage he's going to do. So unless his cabinet and Congress removes this psychopath from office, we will be completely and utterly and irreversibly fucked for the foreseeable future.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.